Please welcome incoming CEO of Conservation International, Dr. M. Sanjayan.
To the end, would you follow me?
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you, and thank you so much for giving me the privilege of speaking to all of you who are doing so much to change the trajectory of our planet. I was born on an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a stone throw away from the water. When I was born, my grandmother took me to an astrologer, and the astrologer read my head. They read the patterns of hair growth on your head. It's apparently what they do in small island nations. And the astrologer told my grandmother the news, which is that I would die by drowning. I now live in Montana, just so you know. So my mother and my whole family kept me away from water. That doesn't mean not being allowed to go into the ocean, but I wasn't allowed to go into a river, a lake, a pond, a bathtub until I was about 10 years old. When my mother broke with tradition and taught me how to swim. She taught the whole neighborhood how to swim. And it changed my life. It changed the entire trajectory of my life. Why am I telling you this? It's because in all of your minds, if you knew you were going to die by drowning, I bet you would want a fighting chance as well. You would want to learn how to swim. Not necessarily do the logical thing of just staying away from water. And that's where we find ourselves with the environment. The death of the planet has been foretold. The question remains, what are we actually going to do about it? Climate change is the biggest threat that we face by a long shot. It's the only one we know of, and we can quantify, we understand, and we still have a small window to actually do something about it. It'll affect every community, every home, every business, every way of life, every city, every country. I have a friend by the name of Professor Ramanathan. He's a very famous atmospheric scientist at Scripps University, at UC San Diego. And Professor Ramanathan had this incredible opportunity to meet Pope Francis. And so he had come up with this huge speech that he was going to deliver in Spanish that he memorized about the science and about what it was going to do to the planet and all of this. But when the moment came, he found himself in a Vatican parking lot. A little Fiat pulls up, and out comes the Pope. And he was completely caught off guard. He forgot his science. More importantly, he forgot his Spanish. So he started speaking from the heart. And he said to the Pope, he said, look, 1 billion people, the richest 1 billion people on the planet, today contribute the largest quantity of pollution, the vast majority of pollution, that affects 3 billion of the world's poor. This is a moral issue, and you as a moral leader have an obligation to help us be better stewards of the planet. Instead of talking about science and math and atmospheric modeling, he talked about equity and justice and fairness. The next week, the Pope sends out his first tweet on climate change, just so you know. It's called the Francis effect. It's a real deal. So the question becomes, if this is a big challenge, what can all of us do about this? I'll give you 3 things. Remember the way Ramanathan talked about this. He talked about it in terms of a moral vocabulary rather than in terms of science. So what can we do about it? Because I think it will affect every community that you all work in, every town, every village that all of us participate in. It will disproportionately affect the poorest amongst us, people of color, people who live on coastlines. It'll disproportionately affect businesses that are connected to the planet. But at the end of the day, it will affect all of us. So here are 3 things that we can do. The first is that we can help work to protect nature. It turns out that protecting forests, in particular tropical forests, does an enormous amount of good when it comes to climate. If we want to keep the planet's temperature at a manageable 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, then protecting forests has to be part of the solution. There's no other way to make the math work. 1 square mile of tropical forest, if destroyed, is the equivalent of basically driving a car about 360 million miles. So protecting nature is a big deal. So you can go to my organization, conservation.org, or to any other conservation group that you are working with in your community and look at what we're going to do. You can become part of your personal pledge around climate. The second thing we can do is we can organize. Climate change is a very unusual problem in that it isn't really anymore the purview of governments. It really is about communities And it's about your towns and your cities and your local mayors and your local businesses. Organizing, it's not just 1,000 points of light, it's 1,000 points of light times 10 million. We really can have the power and the effect in order to create that kind of change. And finally, you can deal with food waste. You heard the CEO of Starbucks, Kevin Johnson, talk about the big push they're making on food waste. Here's why it matters. If food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. Think about it. 40% of the food we grow, we waste, which makes hunger a moral outrage. But more importantly, what you buy and how you cook it and how you prepare it, and most importantly, how you waste it, becomes a huge load on the entire planet. So those are three simple things that you all can do in order to tackle climate change. Remember, this issue, it's an issue that really does impact all of us. It's the very rare issue that every one of us on this planet, every one of you sitting here, contributes to, and yet every one of you has the chance to do something about it. We may never get around to saving the planet in our lifetimes, but we can sure save ourselves, but only if we start to swim. Thank you. Now, it's my real pleasure to introduce someone who's not waiting for permission to act, but is actually going out there and saving the planet. It's my pleasure to introduce 15-year-old Ashton Cofer. Now, he's an inventor, an entrepreneur, and a budding scientist. And most recently, he caught the world's attention with this incredible viral TED Talk. If you haven't seen it, you got to go watch it. And he came up with a patent-pending method to convert Styrofoam, the stuff we waste and throw away, into activated carbon that can be used to purify water. So welcome on stage, Ashton. Thank you. How are you? All right, Ashton, thanks for being here. So tell us a little bit about what this idea is in terms of how you came up with an idea of recycling Styrofoam.
Yeah, so when my teammates and I learned that the US alone throws away almost 2 billion pounds of Styrofoam every year, we were really inspired to want to think of a solution, and we wanted to convert it into something else so that it wouldn't have to be thrown in the trash. So we started researching, and we actually looked into the chemical makeup of Styrofoam. And one of the things that we noticed is that Styrofoam is over 92% carbon. So this led us to try to use the carbon that is already in Styrofoam to create activated carbon, which is very effective in purifying water. And we were really happy with our project because we were able to solve two global problems with it: the accumulation of Styrofoam waste and the need for clean water in our environment.
Wow, that's... I shudder to think what I would have not managed to do if I was in school with you. That is kind of amazing. You just humble all of us. What do you think, when I ask you, would you consider yourself an optimist?
I would definitely consider myself an optimist. I always like to look at things glass half full. And I know that in our environment today, there are a lot of problems, a lot of fear, and a lot of daunting problems. But I really like to try to be optimistic about those problems and to think that if we can use science, we can use teamwork, we can solve any of those problems and really succeed in the future.
Yeah, I think you just can't get out of bed if you're not an optimist and get on with serving the planet. I bet most of the people in this audience really are optimists. Would you say that folks in your age group or even kids younger than yourself, would you say that they have heard and understand the issues around climate change today?
I would definitely say, you can't, if you're in this day and age, you can't not know about climate change. Climate change is all over the news, all over the media, so I would say they definitely understand it.
Right, and sort of hopefully motivated to try and do something about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Did you have any questions for me?
Yeah, what advice do you have for all the young and emerging scientists out there?
I'm always blown away by when I meet folks like yourself, because I'm just incredibly humbled by the amount of creativity and energy that kids who are in high school and college and grade school are really able to generate. And that's not just in the United States, that really is all over the world. What I would say is, for budding scientists, I would say absolutely focus on math and science. It's really important to have, basic science nailed down. But also, focus on being a good communicator, because I think that's part of the challenge, right? Like this friend of mine, Professor Ramanathan, he's a phenomenal scientist, but he is also a great communicator, which is really what allowed him to get this amazingly complicated message to the Pope.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I know that I'm actually, as I said, really optimistic about the future of our generation, what my generation is going to do, because I feel like there's just so much knowledge about science and technology and also about climate change. So I know that my generation is already thinking about ways to want to solve these problems in the future.
Hey, given that you've done this, did you notice that when you came up with this and when you spoke about this to your school and to other communities, was it inspiring for other kids to also want to jump in and volunteer and do something about the planet?
I think it was definitely inspiring to do that. I mean, many people will think, oh, I'm just a kid, I can't do anything. But I mean, you don't even have to do a big science project like I did. It can even be something small, such as composting or making little changes in your own life, biking to work. So it's really just those small things that can all add up.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, right? That you don't always have to be able to, thank God for that, you don't always have to be able to invent something new,
Yeah.
but you can actually double down on the things that are right in front of us every single day.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Right, so what's next plans for you? What are you going to do after this?
I definitely want to keep working with science and technology. I do have my projects, so that I can definitely go further with that. But yeah, definitely doing anything to want to help the environment and want to just push science forward, push technology forward.
Fantastic. Listen, Ashton, thank you so much for being here. I mean, you're really just an inspiration. I met you yesterday for the first time. I'd seen your TED Talk, but it just doubles down and motivates me to even work harder, knowing that there are people like you who will see the worst but have the opportunity to do the most right there, right with us. So now, thank you everyone for this segment. Do you want to introduce our